Denver, Colorado. Spring of 1945. The law office smelled of leather and old paper, the kind of smell that comes from decades of contracts and wills and property deeds stacked floor to ceiling. Outside the window, the city hummed with victory celebrations. The war in Europe had ended just weeks ago. Young men were coming home. But the old man sitting before the recording machine was thinking of a different war, a different homecoming. His name was Samuel Westbrook, and he was 95 years old. His hands trembled as he adjusted the microphone. Liver spots covered skin that had once been brown from the Montana sun, now pale as winter wheat. The lawyer, a young man barely 30, watched him with the careful patience reserved for the very old. "Mr. Westbrook, are you ready to begin?" Samuel looked down at the photograph in his lap. Two faces stared back at him across the gulf of 60 years. A little girl with dark braided hair, clutching a wooden horse. And beside her, a woman in a patched dress, her chin lifted with quiet dignity, despite the poverty written in every thread. "My name is Samuel Westbrook," he said, and his voice, though thin with age, still carried the weight of Montana winters and summer thunderstorms. "This is the year 1945, and I am 95 years old. But this story begins in the winter of 1884, when I was 34 and about to lose everything." He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "They called me the last cattle baron. The newspapers wrote about my empire like it was something permanent, something that would last forever. But before I became a legend, I was just a man, a foolish, stubborn, lonely man who didn't know the difference between building an empire and building a life." The recording machine whirred softly in the silence. "This story is not about love, not the way you might think. It is about how a man learns to become a father when it's already too late. How he learns to build a legacy when everything he's built is about to burn down around him. And how sometimes God sends you salvation in the form of a woman in rags on Christmas Eve." Samuel closed his eyes, and the years fell away like snow from a roof. "It begins with a death and a little girl who prayed for someone kind." Montana Territory, December 1884. Samuel Westbrook stood on the ridge above his ranch and watched the storm clouds gather in the north. They were the color of iron, heavy with snow that would fall before nightfall. Below him, 25,000 head of cattle grazed across 60,000 acres of land that bore his name. The empire he had built with his own two hands. He was 34 years old, and he looked older. The Montana sun had carved lines into his face, lines that deepened around his gray eyes when he squinted against the wind. A scar ran from his left cheekbone to his brow, a souvenir from Gettysburg, where he'd nearly died for a country that was still trying to remember how to be whole. That had been 20 years ago, a different life. "Boss?" The voice belonged to Thomas Morgan, a weathered Irishman of 50 who had been Samuel's foreman for 15 years. Tom was the closest thing Samuel had to a friend, which was to say, they sometimes shared a drink in silence and trusted each other with their lives. "Storm's coming," Samuel said. "Aye, bad one by the look of it." Tom shifted his weight, his boots crunching in the frozen grass. "We should move the herd south, down into the valley where they'll have shelter." "Cost $8,000 to move them." "Cost more if they freeze." Samuel was quiet, calculating numbers in his head the way other men counted prayers. 8,000 in transport costs, against the possibility of losing cattle in the storm. The mathematics of survival that he had learned in the years since he'd bought his first 200 acres with his Army discharge pay. "No," he said finally, "we leave them. The risk is acceptable." Tom said nothing, but Samuel felt the weight of his disapproval. It was one of the things he respected about the Irishman. Tom disagreed without arguing, advised without insisting, and did his job better than any 3 men Samuel could have hired. "Your call, boss," Tom said at last. They stood together watching the clouds roll in from the north, 2 men who understood that in Montana, winter was not a season, but a war. Samuel's office was in the main house, a room lined with ledgers and maps and the accumulated paperwork of running an empire. He sat at his desk that evening, whiskey untouched at his elbow, and listened to the first snow begin to fall against the windows. A knock at the door. "Come." The man who entered was Harrison Crawford, Samuel's lawyer, and one of the few people in Pine Creek who Samuel actually trusted. Crawford was 45, educated at Harvard, and had come west for reasons he never fully explained. They had known each other for 10 years, and in that time Crawford had never given Samuel reason to doubt him. Samuel. Crawford nodded, settling into the chair across the desk without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk about your will. We talked about it last month. And you're still planning to sell everything and donate the proceeds to veterans charities when you die. That's right. Crawford leaned forward. Samuel, you're 34 years old, unmarried, no children, no heirs. If you die tomorrow, this empire you've spent 18 years building will be sold off in pieces to the highest bidder. Then it will belong to whoever wants it most. That's not legacy, that's waste. Samuel reached for the whiskey, took a slow drink. Outside, the wind was picking up. I don't have time for a family, Harrison. The ranch requires everything I have. The ranch is not a family, it's property. It's all I need. Crawford pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket and laid it on the desk. Then you won't be interested in this. Samuel looked down at the advertisement Crawford had circled in red ink. Gentleman rancher seeks educated woman for marriage of convenience. Must be willing to relocate to Montana territory. Compensation and security provided. I didn't place this, Samuel said slowly. I know, I did. 2 weeks ago. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling in the hearth. Then Samuel laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You want me to buy a wife from a catalog like I'm ordering fence posts? I want you to consider that there are women in this country who need security, and men like you who need heirs. It's a practical arrangement. I tried marriage once, Harrison. Or have you forgotten Margaret Ashford? The name hung in the air between them. Crawford's expression softened. That was 12 years ago, Samuel. She made her choice. Yes, she chose a rich man's name over a poor man's future. Turned out I had the future after all. Samuel's voice was flat. But I learned my lesson. Trust is expensive. I can't afford it. Crawford stood to leave but paused at the door. You've received a response to the advertisement. Burn it. Her name is Catherine Ann Morrison. Her father was Judge Henry Morrison of St. Louis. He died 6 months ago, left her with $15,000 in debts and nothing else. She sold everything to pay them. Everything, Samuel, down to her mother's wedding ring. Samuel's hand tightened on the whiskey glass. She writes that she's not looking for love or wealth, just a purpose, a place where she can be useful. Crawford met Samuel's eyes. Read the letter, at least give her that much respect. He left the envelope on the desk and walked out into the snow. Samuel sat alone in the firelight, staring at the cream-colored envelope. The handwriting was elegant, educated. He could smell a faint trace of lavender. He did not open it that night, but he did not burn it either. Morning came with 3 feet of snow and news of death. Sheriff Robert Harrison found Samuel in the barn, checking the feed supplies. Buck, as everyone called him, was a solid man in his 50s who had worn the star for 20 years and had learned when to enforce the law and when to look the other way. His face now was grim. Samuel, Tom Morgan died last night. The pitchfork slipped from Samuel's hands, clattered against the frozen ground. For a moment, he could not breathe, could not think, could not process the words that made no sense. What? Heart attack, the doc says. Been sick for months, apparently. Hid it from everyone. Buck's voice was gentle. I'm sorry, Samuel. I know you two went back a long way. 15 years. Tom had been there when Samuel bought his first 100 acres, had helped him build the first fence, dig the first well, survive the first winter when they'd nearly starved. Tom had saved his life in a barn fire in 1880, dragged him out of the flames with his bare hands, burned his own arm so badly he still bore the scars, and Samuel had never known he was sick. He has a daughter, Samuel heard himself say, Sophie, 8 years old. I know. Buck looked uncomfortable. That's the other reason I'm here. The girl's got no family. Mother died in childbirth. Tom was all she had. Samuel knew what came next, knew it before Buck said the words. Under Montana law, a child with no living relatives goes to the territorial orphanage in Denver, 400 miles from here. They'll come for her, end of the week. No. The word came out harder than Samuel intended. Buck raised an eyebrow. No? Tom saved my life. I owe him. Samuel was already moving toward the door, pulling on his coat. Where's the girl now? Still at Tom's cabin. Mrs. Chen from the general store is with her. Tom's cabin was a small structure at the eastern edge of the ranch. Modest but well kept. Samuel had given it to Tom 10 years ago, a reward for loyalty that now seemed pitifully inadequate. Inside, it was warm but silent. Too silent. Sophie Morrison sat on the floor near the fireplace, clutching a wooden horse that Tom had carved for her years ago. She was small for 8 years old, thin in the way of children who had known hunger. Dark hair fell in tangled curls around a face that might have been pretty if it hadn't been so pale, so pinched with grief. She did not cry. That was what struck Samuel most. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, like she had used up all her tears in the night and had none left for the morning. Sophie. He knelt down slowly, awkwardly. He had no experience with children, had never wanted any. I'm Samuel Westbrook. Your father worked for me. I know who you are. Her voice was small but clear. Papa talked about you all the time. He said you were the best man he ever knew. The words hit Samuel like a fist to the chest. Your papa was wrong, he said quietly, but he was a good man himself, the best. They're sending me away. It was not a question. To Denver, to an orphanage where they'll take care of you. No, they won't. Sophie looked at him directly for the first time, and Samuel saw Tom in those eyes, the same stubborn strength. Papa told me about those places. He said they beat children, make them work 16 hours a day. He said lots of kids die there. Samuel felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he had built so carefully over the years. I can't keep you, he said, and hated himself for the words. I'm not family. I don't know how to raise a child. The ranch takes all my time. Papa said you owed him. Sophie's knuckles were white around the wooden horse. He said you owed him for the fire, for pulling you out when you were burning. The memory rose up vivid and terrible. The smoke choking his lungs, the heat blistering his skin, and Tom's voice shouting his name. Tom's hands dragging him through the flames, Tom's body shielding him from the collapsing roof. Samuel closed his eyes. 3 days, he heard himself say. You can stay at the ranch for 3 days while I find you a proper family. Someone who can take care of you the way you deserve. Thank you, Sophie's voice cracked on the words. Don't thank me. I'm not a good man, Sophie. I'm just paying a debt. But as he walked out into the snow, Samuel could not shake the image of those dark eyes watching him, waiting to see if he would be another person who left. The envelope was still on his desk when he returned to the house that night. He stared at it for a long time, thinking about debts and duties and the empire he had built in the ashes of his pride, thinking about Tom, who had died alone with his secrets rather than burden anyone with his weakness, thinking about a little girl who clutched a wooden horse like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept disappearing. Samuel opened the envelope. The letter was written in a careful, educated hand on cream-colored paper that had seen better days. It was 3 pages long, but Samuel read it through without stopping. Dear Mr. Westbrook, my name is Catherine Ann Morrison. I am 28 years old, unmarried, and the daughter of the late Judge Henry Morrison of St. Louis. I write to you not as a woman seeking romance, but as one seeking honest work and a purpose. 6 months ago, my father passed away suddenly. I discovered that he had accumulated debts of $15,000, the result of trusting the wrong business partners and lending money to friends who never repaid him. As his only heir, I considered the debts a matter of family honor. I sold our home. I sold the furniture, the books, my mother's jewelry. I sold everything down to my grandmother's silver tea service. The debts are now paid in full, but I am left with nothing. I was educated at the Boston Ladies Seminary. I speak French and Latin. I can manage household accounts, teach children, play the piano, and organize a formal dinner for 20 guests. These skills were intended to make me a suitable wife for a gentleman of means. Instead, they have made me unemployable. I am too educated to be a maid, too poor to be a wife, and too honest to pretend otherwise. Your advertisement spoke of needing someone to manage a household and educate a child. I can do both. I do not require affection or romance. I require only honest work and the dignity of earning my keep. If you are willing to take a chance on a woman who arrives with nothing but her integrity, I will board the next train west. Respectfully, Catherine Ann Morrison. Samuel read the letter twice, then a third time. There was no pleading in it, no false humility. Just the plain truth laid out like an account book. Debts paid, pride intact, future uncertain. He thought of Sophie sitting alone in Tom's cabin with a wooden horse and nowhere to go. He thought of Crawford's words. Legacy is not property, it's people. And he thought of Margaret Ashford, who had looked at his calloused hands and empty pockets 12 years ago and chosen wealth over love, who had married Richard Pemberton in his bank account and died 2 years later in childbirth, leaving behind nothing but a tombstone and Samuel's bitter proof that trust was a luxury he could not afford. But this Catherine Morrison was not asking for trust. She was offering a transaction, work for security, service for purpose. It was the kind of deal Samuel understood. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The train arrived at Pine Creek on Christmas Eve, 3 days after Samuel mailed his response. He stood on the platform with Sophie beside him, both of them wrapped against the brutal cold, 20 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache with each breath. The girl had not spoken much in the 3 days since her father's death. She followed Samuel around the ranch like a shadow, ate when told to eat, slept when told to sleep. But her eyes were always watching, always waiting to see if he would send her away. Samuel had not found a family willing to take her. The truth was, he had barely looked. Every time he started to ask someone, he remembered Tom pulling him from the fire, remembered the promise he had made to a little girl with nowhere to go. 3 days had become indefinite, and indefinite had led him here, to a frozen train platform, waiting for a woman he had never met. The train screeched to a halt in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. Doors opened. Passengers began to disembark, bundled in furs and heavy coats. And then he saw her. Catherine Ann Morrison stepped down onto the platform carrying a single carpet bag so worn that the fabric had been patched in a dozen places. She wore a navy wool dress that had been mended so many times it was impossible to tell what the original color had been. Her coat was thin, inadequate for Montana winter. Her shoes were wrapped in cloth to cover the holes. But her spine was straight, her chin was lifted, and her eyes, when they met Samuel's across the platform, were steady and clear. She was not beautiful, not in the way Margaret had been beautiful, with her silk dresses and carefully arranged curls. Catherine's beauty was in the set of her shoulders, the quiet dignity in the way she walked toward him through the snow. Samuel removed his hat. Miss Morrison? Mr. Westbrook. Her voice was low, cultured, Eastern. Thank you for meeting me. This is Sophie. He gestured to the girl beside him, the child I mentioned in my letter. Catherine knelt down, heedless of the snow soaking into her dress. Hello, Sophie. Your father must have loved you very much to make such a beautiful horse. Sophie clutched the wooden horse tighter. How did you know my papa made it? Because I can see the care in every detail. The mane is perfect. Each leg is exactly the same length. Only someone who loved you would spend that much time getting it right. For the first time in 3 days, something flickered in Sophie's eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. What's his name? Catherine asked. Thunder. Thunder. That's a strong name. Catherine stood up slowly, and Samuel noticed her hands were blue with cold. Does Thunder like adventures? Sophie nodded, just a tiny movement. Good, because I think we're about to have one. Behind them, a woman's voice cut through the cold like a knife. Well, well, Samuel Westbrook. Buying wives from catalogs now, are we? Victoria Pemberton stood 20 feet away, wrapped in a fur coat that cost more than most men earned in a year. She was 35, still handsome in the way of women who had never known real hardship. Her late husband had been Richard Pemberton, the same banker who had married Margaret Ashford 12 years ago after stealing her from Samuel. Margaret had died in childbirth in 1874, leaving Richard a widower. He had remarried Victoria 2 years later, in 1876. Richard himself had died in a riding accident 5 years back, in 1879, leaving Victoria his considerable fortune, but no children to share it with. She looked Catherine up and down with the cold assessment of a woman pricing livestock. Dear God, Samuel, even you could do better than this. The poor thing looks like she's been sleeping in a barn. Samuel felt rage rise in his throat, but Catherine spoke before he could. Mrs. Pemberton, I presume? Catherine's voice was perfectly polite. Mr. Westbrook has mentioned you. Has he? Victoria's smile was sharp. And what did he say? That you were a woman of considerable means and little kindness. Catherine's expression did not change. I see he was accurate on both counts. The platform went silent. Even the porters stopped to listen. Victoria's face flushed red. How dare you? I dare because I have nothing left to lose except my integrity, and I will not surrender that to spare your vanity. Catherine turned back to Samuel. Shall we go? It's very cold and Sophie is shivering. Samuel realized his mouth was hanging open. He closed it, picked up Catherine's pathetic carpet bag, and led them toward the wagon. Behind them, Victoria's voice rang out, loud enough for the whole platform to hear. You'll regret this, Samuel Westbrook. That woman is nothing but a fortune hunter in rags. Catherine did not look back. Neither did Samuel. But Sophie, small Sophie, who had not smiled in days, looked up at Catherine and whispered, I like you. I like you too, Catherine whispered back. The wagon ride to the ranch took an hour through snow that was falling heavier now, thick white flakes that caught in Catherine's hair and melted against her frozen cheeks. Samuel drove in silence, acutely aware of the woman beside him and the child between them. I should explain the arrangement, he said finally. You'll serve as governess to Sophie and manage the household. $40 a month. You'll have Tom's cabin. It's separate from the main house. I understand. There will be no marriage, no romantic entanglement. This is a business arrangement. I would prefer it that way. Samuel glanced at her. Why? Because I trusted my father's business partners, and they betrayed him. I trusted that my education would provide security, and it left me unemployable. I have learned, Mr. Westbrook, that contracts are safer than emotions. It was exactly what Samuel believed, exactly what he had told Crawford a dozen times. But hearing it from Catherine's lips made it sound lonelier than it ever had before. The town will talk, he said. They'll say things about you, about why you came here. Let them talk. I did not travel 2,000 miles to win the approval of strangers. Sophie had fallen asleep against Catherine's shoulder, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon. Catherine held her carefully, making sure the blankets stayed tucked around the girl's small body. Samuel watched from the corner of his eye, something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. Why did you really come? He asked quietly. Catherine was silent for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, because my father died believing he was a failure, believing his daughter would end up in poverty because of his mistakes. I could not bear the thought of proving him right. So you came west to start over? No, Mr. Westbrook. I came west because there was nowhere else to go. The ranch appeared through the snow like something from a dream. 60,000 acres of white stretching to the mountains. The main house was large, 2 stories of solid timber with smoke rising from 3 chimneys. Barns and outbuildings dotted the landscape. In the distance, cattle huddled against the wind. Catherine's breath caught. It's beautiful. It's just a ranch. No, she shook her head slowly. It's more than that. It's a legacy. Samuel had no response to that. He pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Catherine down. Sophie woke as he lifted her, blinking sleepily. Are we home? The girl asked. Catherine and Samuel looked at each other over the child's head. Home. Such a simple word. Such a complicated concept. Yes, Catherine said softly. We're home. 3 days passed before Richard Blackwell came to call. Catherine spent those days settling into Tom's cabin and beginning Sophie's education. The girl was bright, desperately so. She could already read at a level far beyond her years, thanks to Tom's patient teaching. But she was starved for learning, for someone to show her the world beyond Montana's snow. Catherine taught her mathematics in the morning, history in the afternoon, and French in the evening. By the third day, Sophie was following her around like a devoted puppy, asking endless questions about everything from the Boston Ladies Seminary to how steamships worked to whether Catherine thought women would ever be allowed to vote. Samuel watched from a distance, working 18-hour days as he always did, but finding excuses to come back to the house more often than usual. For meals, for coffee, for reports on ranch business that could have waited. He told himself it was to check on Sophie, to make sure the arrangement was working. But the truth was he found himself drawn to Catherine's quiet competence. The way she had reorganized his chaotic household accounts in 2 days and saved him $300 a month through careful budgeting. The way she mended Sophie's dresses with patient, precise stitches. The way she stood at the cabin window each evening, looking out at the mountains with an expression he could not read. She was nothing like Margaret had been. Margaret had been all silk and perfume and carefully practiced charm. Catherine was plain wool and lavender soap and honest work. Margaret had promised to love him and had lied. Catherine had promised nothing, and somehow that felt more trustworthy than any vow. On the third day Blackwell arrived. Samuel was in the barn when he heard the horses. 3 of them, expensive thoroughbreds that cost more than most men earned in 5 years. The riders were dressed in city clothes, out of place against the snow. But Samuel recognized the man in the lead immediately. Richard Blackwell was 42 years old and owned half of Montana, or at least he acted like he did. His bank, Montana Frontier Bank, held mortgages on nearly every ranch in the territory. His railroad company controlled the shipping routes. His political connections reached all the way to Washington. He was, by any measure, the most powerful man for 500 miles. He was also the man who had been in business with Richard Pemberton, Victoria's late husband. And there were rumors, whispers that Samuel had never quite been able to prove, that Blackwell had been involved in Pemberton's convenient death. Samuel. Blackwell dismounted smoothly, extending a hand that Samuel did not shake. Good to see you. What do you want, Richard? Blackwell smiled. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Can a man visit an old friend? We're not friends. No, I suppose we're not. Business acquaintances, then. Blackwell looked around the ranch with the expression of a man appraising property. I heard you've taken in Tom Morgan's orphan and hired a woman from back east. News travels fast. Small town. Blackwell's eyes flicked toward the main house where Catherine was visible through the window, teaching Sophie. Catherine Morrison, isn't it? Daughter of Judge Henry Morrison. Something cold slithered down Samuel's spine. You knew her father? Did business with him years back. Shame what happened. The scandal, I mean. What scandal? Blackwell's smile widened. You don't know? Judge Morrison was accused of taking bribes from Western Railroad. $50,000 to rule in their favor on a land dispute. He died of a heart attack the day before his trial. He paused. Very convenient timing, some said. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. You're lying. Am I? Ask Miss Morrison yourself. Ask her why she really came to Montana. Ask her if dear old Dad didn't leave her with more than just debts. Get off my land. Not yet. Blackwell's tone hardened. I came to make you an offer, Samuel, a generous one. I want 20,000 acres of your eastern property, the land where the Transcontinental Railroad will run. I'll pay you $500,000 for it. That land will be worth $2 million when the railroad comes through. If the railroad comes through, if you live that long, if you have heirs to inherit it. Blackwell let the words hang in the air. You're 34 years old, unmarried, no children. If you die tomorrow, your land goes to probate, gets sold to the highest bidder. Which would be you? Which would be me? Blackwell's smile was predatory now. Sell me the land now, Samuel. Get rich and live comfortably. Or die alone and watch everything you built get auctioned off piece by piece. I'll take my chances. Will you? Blackwell glanced toward the house again. What about the girl? What about your new housekeeper? What happens to them when you're gone? It was a threat, barely veiled. Samuel's hand moved to the pistol at his hip. Blackwell noticed. Careful, Samuel. I have witnesses, and I have the law. He swung back up onto his horse. You have until March to pay your loan, $300,000, due in full. If you can't pay, the bank seizes your property as collateral. I'll pay. With what? You have 25,000 head of cattle, but they're all up in the northern pasture. If this winter is as bad as they're predicting, half of them will freeze to death before spring. Blackwell gathered his reins. Think about my offer. 500,000 in your hand right now, or the risk of losing everything in 3 months. He rode away, his men following. Samuel stood in the snow, rage and fear warring in his chest. $300,000. He had the assets to cover it, but not the liquid cash. Not unless he sold cattle. And selling cattle in a bad winter meant taking a loss of 40% or more. Blackwell knew that, had been counting on it. The bastard was trying to strangle him slowly. Catherine found him an hour later, still standing in the barn, staring at nothing. Westbrook? He turned. She wore one of the 2 dresses she owned, the gray wool one that had been mended so many times it was more patched than original fabric. Her hands were red from washing dishes in cold water. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. She looked exhausted and worried. Is it true, he asked, about your father? She went very still. What did Mr. Blackwell tell you? That your father was accused of taking bribes, that he died before his trial. My father never took a bribe in his life. Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Richard Blackwell manufactured evidence to destroy him. My father discovered that Blackwell was falsifying railroad contracts to steal land from homesteaders. He was going to expose him. So Blackwell struck first. You can prove this? No, the evidence died with my father. Blackwell made sure of that. Her eyes met Samuel's, and he saw something burning there, something fierce. But I know my father was innocent, and I know Richard Blackwell is a murderer who has never answered for his crimes. Samuel studied her face, looking for signs of deception, for the tells that Margaret had shown when she lied. He found none. Why didn't you tell me this before you came? Because I knew if I mentioned Blackwell's name, you would refuse to hire me. Men like him have long memories and powerful friends. Association with me could damage your reputation. So you lied by omission. Yes. She did not flinch from the accusation. I lied because I was desperate, because I had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose except my integrity. And I have been asking myself every day since I arrived whether that makes me as bad as the people who destroyed my father. The snow was falling harder now, big wet flakes that stuck to the windows and muffled all sound. Inside the barn, the 2 of them stood in the warm darkness, and Samuel felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. Trust was expensive. He had learned that with Margaret, but so was loneliness. Blackwell wants my land, he said finally. He'll do anything to get it, including using you. I am not his instrument. How do I know that? Catherine stepped closer. Because I have spent my entire life watching my father sacrifice his career to do the right thing, watching him give money to people who never paid him back, watching him trust men who betrayed him. And I have spent 6 months living with the consequences of his goodness. Her voice cracked, just slightly. You want to know why I really came to Montana, Mr. Westbrook? I came because I am tired of watching good men lose. I came because I wanted to be somewhere that doing the right thing actually matters. And I came because a little girl named Sophie needed someone to stay. She turned to leave, then stopped. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to like me, but I am not Richard Blackwell's and I am simply a woman trying to rebuild her life with the only tools she has left, honesty and hard work. Miss Morrison, she looked back. Will you stay, even knowing that associating with me makes you a target for Blackwell? Will you? It was a fair question. Samuel almost smiled. I've been a target my whole life. One more enemy won't change much. Then I will stay. Catherine pulled her thin shawl tighter against the cold. Sophie is inside waiting for her geography lesson, and your accounts need to be reconciled before the end of the month. I have work to do. She walked out into the snow and Samuel watched her go. 3 days. That was how long it had taken for Catherine Morrison to turn his carefully ordered world upside down, to make him question things he had believed for years, to make him feel things he had sworn never to feel again. Crawford found him in the barn an hour later, holding an envelope. "This came for you from the Territorial Orphanage." Samuel opened it with numb fingers. The letter was brief and official. Sophie Morrison was to be transferred to the Denver Territorial Orphanage within 30 days, unless a suitable guardian could be found and legally approved. 30 days. "What are you going to do?" Crawford asked. Samuel looked out at the falling snow, thought about Tom pulling him from the fire, thought about Sophie clutching her wooden horse with eyes that had already seen too much loss, thought about Catherine teaching the girl French verbs while wearing a dress held together with hope and thread. "I'm going to do something stupid," he said. "How stupid?" "Marry Miss Morrison, adopt Sophie, and fight Richard Blackwell for everything I have." Crawford was quiet for a long moment. Then he started to laugh. "You know, Samuel, when you decide to do something, you don't do it halfway. Never have. This could destroy you. Blackwell has resources you can't imagine. Then I'll fight with what I have." Samuel folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "I built this ranch from nothing, Harrison. I survived Gettysburg and poverty and Margaret's betrayal. I can survive Richard Blackwell. And if you can't..." Samuel thought about legacy, about what he would leave behind when he died, about whether an empire of land and cattle meant anything if there was no one to inherit it, no one to carry it forward. "Then at least I'll die fighting for something that matters." That night, Samuel knocked on Catherine's cabin door. She answered in her nightgown, a worn white cotton thing that had been mended as many times as her dresses. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. Without the armor of her neat bun and straight spine, she looked younger, vulnerable. "Mr. Westbrook, is something wrong?" "I have a proposition." The words came out more abruptly than he intended. "A business arrangement. I thought we already had one." "This is different." Samuel pulled the letter from his pocket. "Sophie has 30 days before they send her to the orphanage. I can adopt her, but the court requires proof of stable family structure, a woman's presence in the household." Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. "You want to marry me." "In name only, a legal arrangement, nothing more. You would help me raise Sophie and manage the household. I would provide surety and help you restore your father's reputation." "How?" "Blackwell destroyed your father with manufactured evidence. I have resources, connections. We find the truth and make it public. Clear your family name." Catherine leaned against the doorframe, studying him in the lamplight. "And what about Sophie? What happens to her in this arrangement?" "She becomes my legal daughter, protected, educated, given the life Tom would have wanted for her. And us, you and I, business partners, nothing more. No affection, no intimacy, no complications." Catherine was quiet for so long that Samuel started to think she would refuse. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Westbrook, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right. Why are you really doing this? Is it guilt over Tom, duty to Sophie, or something else?" Samuel looked at this woman who had arrived in rags 3 days ago and had already begun to change everything, who had stood up to Victoria Pemberton without flinching, who had reorganized his chaos into order, who had made Sophie smile for the first time since Tom's death. "I don't know," he admitted. "I spent 18 years building this empire alone, proving I didn't need anyone. And then Tom died and Sophie appeared, and you stepped off that train looking like you'd fight God himself to survive. And I realized that maybe I've been building the wrong thing all along." "What should you have been building?" "A family." The word felt strange in his mouth. Foreign. "A legacy that matters." Catherine extended her hand. "Then I accept your proposition, Mr. Westbrook. I will marry you. I will help you raise Sophie, and I will fight Richard Blackwell at your side." Samuel took her hand. Her fingers were cold and calloused from hard work, but her grip was firm. "There's one condition," she said. "What's that?" "When this is over, when Sophie is grown and your empire is secure and Blackwell is defeated, you give me the choice. to stay or to leave. No obligations, no guilt, just freedom. Agreed. They shook hands in the doorway of Tom's cabin while snow fell silent and thick around them. A contract, a bargain, a marriage in everything but heart. But as Catherine closed the door and Samuel walked back through the snow to the empty house, he could not shake the feeling that he had just made either the best decision of his life or the worst. And in the darkness at the edge of the ranch, Richard Blackwell sat on his horse and watched the light go out in Catherine's cabin. He smiled. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The wedding took place on a gray January morning in Crawford's law office with 3 witnesses and no celebration. Catherine wore the better of her 2 dresses, the navy wool that she had pressed the night before until every wrinkle disappeared. Samuel wore his Sunday suit, the one he had bought 15 years ago and had worn exactly 4 times. Sophie stood between them in a white dress that Catherine had sewn from old curtains, clutching Thunder the wooden horse like a talisman against uncertainty. Judge Sarah Mitchell presided. She was 55, the first female judge in Montana Territory, and she looked at Samuel and Catherine with eyes that had seen too many marriages of convenience to be fooled by protestations of love. "Do you, Samuel Westbrook, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Catherine Morrison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Catherine's voice did not waver. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Mitchell closed her book. "You may kiss the bride if you're so inclined." Samuel and Catherine looked at each other. Neither moved. Sophie tugged on Catherine's skirt. "Does this mean you're my mama now?" Catherine knelt down, eye level with the girl. "If you want me to be." "I want." Sophie's voice was fierce, almost desperate. "I prayed for a mama every night since Papa died. I prayed for someone kind who would stay." Catherine pulled the girl into her arms, and Samuel saw tears streak down both their faces. Something twisted in his chest, hard and painful and unnamed. "I will stay," Catherine whispered. "I promise you, Sophie. I will stay." Crawford handed Samuel the marriage certificate and the adoption papers. "Congratulations. You are now legally responsible for both of them." "I know what I signed up for." "Do you?" Crawford's expression was unreadable. "Because in my experience, marriage has a way of becoming more than a contract." Samuel folded the papers and put them in his pocket. "Then I'll deal with that if it happens." But even as he said it, he was watching Catherine wipe Sophie's tears with gentle hands, and he was remembering what it felt like to care about something other than land and cattle and proving the world wrong. The first 2 months passed in a strange rhythm of domesticity that Samuel had never experienced. Catherine rose at 5 each morning and had coffee ready when he came down from his solitary bedroom. She never asked to share his room, and he never offered. Their arrangement was clear, practical, uncomplicated by the messy reality of physical intimacy. But there were other intimacies he had not anticipated. The way she reorganized his accounts and discovered he had been overpaying his suppliers by $15,000 annually. The way she taught Sophie mathematics at the kitchen table while making bread, flour dusting her hands, and patience in every explanation. The way she stood at the window each evening looking at the mountains, and he found himself standing beside her, not speaking, just sharing the silence. Sophie bloomed under Catherine's care, like a plant finally given water and sunlight. Within 6 weeks, the girl had advanced 2 grade levels in reading and could recite French conjugations and calculate compound interest. But more than that, she laughed. She ran through the house with Thunder galloping beside her. She climbed into Catherine's lap for bedtime stories and called her mama with a certainty that made Samuel's throat tight. And slowly, without quite meaning to, Sophie began to call Samuel Papa. The first time it happened, he froze. They were in the barn, and Chiawi had asked him to show her how to properly saddle a horse. "Like this, Papa?" Samuel's hands stilled on the leather straps. The word hung in the cold air between them. "Yes," he managed, "just like that." Sophie beamed at him, and Samuel felt something he had not felt in 18 years. Something warm and terrifying and utterly beyond his control. He was beginning to care. That night at dinner, Samuel broke his own rule. He came home at 7 instead of 10. He sat at the table with Catherine and Sophie instead of eating alone in his office. And when Sophie chattered about her lessons and Catherine explained the improvements she had made to the household budget, Samuel found himself listening, engaged, present. Catherine noticed. "You're home early. Thought I'd spend some time with my family." The word felt strange in his mouth. "Is that all right?" "More than all right." Catherine's smile was small but genuine. "Sophie has been waiting to show you her geography project." The girl launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the map she had drawn, marking all the territories and states, labeling capitals and major rivers. It was meticulous work, far beyond what most 8-year-olds could accomplish. "She has your attention to detail," Catherine said quietly. "I'm not her blood father." "No, but you're the father who shows up. That's what matters." Samuel looked at Catherine across the table, lamplight catching in her dark hair, and something shifted inside him. Some wall he had built to protect himself from the pain of Margaret's betrayal. He pushed the feeling down, locked it away. This was a contract, not a romance. He would not make the mistake of confusing business with emotion. That night, Samuel lay awake in his empty bed, acutely aware that Catherine was just across the yard in Tom's cabin. The house had never felt so large or so lonely. He wondered if she was awake too, staring at her ceiling, thinking about this strange arrangement they had made. He turned over and tried to sleep, but sleep was a long time coming. The great blizzard of 1885 came in late February like the wrath of God. Samuel had seen bad winters before, had survived the brutal cold of 1880 that killed 10,000 head of cattle across the territory. But this was different. This was biblical. The temperature dropped to 40 below zero. Snow fell for 3 days straight, drifts climbing to 12 feet. Wind screamed across the plains at 80 miles per hour, stripping the skin off any man foolish enough to venture outside. And Samuel's 25,000 head of cattle were scattered across 60,000 acres with no shelter. "I have to move them," he told Catherine on the second day of the storm. "Drive them south to the valley where they'll have windbreaks." "In this weather? Samuel, you'll deal." "If I don't, the cattle will, and if the cattle die, we lose everything. Blackwell will foreclose, and all of this was for nothing." Catherine grabbed his arm. "Sophie needs a father more than she needs cattle. Sophie needs a roof over her head, food on the table, security." Samuel pulled on his heavy coat. "That's what the cattle provide. The cattle are not your family. We are." The words stopped him cold. "I had to boil." Catherine's hand was still on his arm, her eyes fierce in the lamplight. Behind her, Sophie watched from the doorway, thunder clutched against her chest. "Please don't go, Papa," the girl whispered. "Please." Samuel looked at his daughter, his wife, the family he had created with signatures and legal documents and a promise to a dead man. "I have to," he said, "but I promise I'll come back." He rode out into the blizzard with 4 ranch hands, all of them knowing it might be suicide. The wind was so strong it knocked 2 of the horses sideways. The cold was so intense that Samuel could feel his lungs burning with each breath. They found the cattle 3 miles north, huddled together in mindless terror as the snow buried them alive. Over the next 6 hours, as Samuel and his men drove the herd south, losing feeling in their hands and feet, their faces going numb, their bodies shutting down degree by frozen degree. By the time they reached the valley, 2 of the men had collapsed. Samuel himself could barely see, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of white. He got the cattle into shelter, got his men into the line shack, and then tried to ride home. He made it 2 miles before he fell from his horse. The cold wrapped around him like death itself. He could not feel his hands, could not feel his feet, could barely remember why he was out here in the first place. Tom's voice came to him through the snow. "You saved my life once, boss. Time to return the favor." "Get up." "Can't. You got a wife waiting, a daughter. You promised them you'd come back." "Too tired." "Since when does Samuel Westbrook quit?" Samuel forced his eyes open. Above him, the sky was beginning to clear. Stars emerged like pinpricks in black velvet, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to whether he lived or died. He thought of Catherine standing in the lamplight, hand on his arm, voice fierce. The cattle are not your family. We are. He thought of Sophie whispering please in a voice that knew too well what it meant to lose someone. He thought of the empire he had built and the legacy he was trying to create, and realized that Crawford had been right all along. Legacy was not land. It was people. Samuel got to his feet. It took him 3 hours to walk the remaining miles to the ranch. 3 hours of putting one frozen foot in front of the other, following the fence line when he could no longer see where he was going. 3 hours of fighting the urge to simply lie down in the snow and sleep. But he made it. Catherine saw him first. She had been standing at the window watching for him, wrapped in a blanket, face pale with fear. When she saw him stumbling through the snow, she ran outside without a coat, without shoes, and caught him as he fell. "I've got you," she said, her voice breaking. "I've got you." Samuel tried to speak, but his lips would not move. Catherine dragged him inside, calling for Sophie to bring blankets, to stoke the fire, to heat water. She stripped off his frozen clothes with shaking hands and wrapped him in quilts, and held him while his body convulsed with shivers. "You fool," she whispered against his hair. "You stupid, stubborn fool. I thought you were dead. I thought you were dead, and I would have to tell Sophie that her father left her just like all the others. I'm sorry." The words came out slurred. "Don't apologize. Just don't die. Please, Samuel, don't die." It was the first time she had called him by his first name instead of Mr. Westbrook. The first time he heard real emotion in her voice instead of the careful control she always maintained. Sophie appeared beside them, tears streaming down her face. "Papa? Papa, please wake up." "Ma, wake." Samuel forced his eyes open. "I came back. Promised." "You're stupid," Sophie sobbed, echoing Catherine's words. "You're stupid, and I love you." Samuel's heart cracked open. "Love you too, little bird." And Catherine held them both, and for the first time in 18 years, Samuel Westbrook let himself be held. He woke the next morning in his own bed with no memory of how he got there. His hands and feet were bandaged, his shoulder wrapped where he had apparently dislocated it at some point during the night. Catherine sat in a chair beside the bed, dark circles under her eyes, still wearing the clothes from the night before. "You stayed. Someone had to make sure you didn't die of stupidity," but her voice was gentle. "The cattle? You saved 3,000 head, lost 5,000 to the cold." She paused. "The men you rode out with are all alive. Frostbite, but they'll recover." 5,000 head. At $30 per animal, that was $150,000 gone. Added to the 300,000 he owed Blackwell, he was now in deeper than ever. Catherine seemed to read his thoughts. "We'll figure it out." "We?" "Yes, we are." That's what married people do, isn't it? Face problems together. Samuel looked at this woman who had married him for security and a chance to clear her father's name. This woman who had spent the night keeping watch over him like he was something precious instead of just a business arrangement. "Catherine," his voice was rough, "what are we doing here?" She knew what he was really asking. What is this becoming? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know that when I saw you fall in the snow, I couldn't breathe. I know that Sophie calls you Papa with such love it makes me cry. I know that this was supposed to be a contract, but it's starting to feel like something else. What do we do about it?" Catherine reached out and took his bandaged hand in hers. "We survive. We fight Blackwell. We raise Sophie. And maybe when this is all over, we figure out what we actually mean to each other. I'm not good at this. At feelings. At family. I've spent 18 years alone because it's safer." "I know. So have I." Catherine's smile was sad. "We're quite a pair. Two people so afraid of being hurt that we agreed to a marriage without love. And if love happens anyway, then we deal with it together." Samuel squeezed her hand as hard as his frozen fingers allowed. "I'm glad you're here." "So am I." Outside, the blizzard had passed, but the real storm was just beginning. March came in cold and clear, and with it, Richard Blackwell's deadline. Samuel sat in his office calculating numbers that refused to add up. $300,000 due in full by March 31st. After losing 5,000 head of cattle worth $150,000, His remaining liquid assets from previous beef sales and cash reserves totaled $180,000. Combined with what he could scrape together, he was still short by nearly $120,000. Even if he sold his remaining cattle at full market value, he would still be short. And Blackwell knew it. The banker arrived on March 15th with Sheriff Buck Harrison and 10 armed men. They rode up to the ranch in a show of force designed to intimidate. Samuel met them on the porch, Catherine at his side despite his instructions for her to stay inside. Samuel. Blackwell dismounted smoothly, brushing snow from his expensive coat. Today's the day. The note isn't due until the 31st. I'm giving you a courtesy visit, 2 weeks to come up with $300,000. Can you do it? I'll have your money, Othen, will you? Blackwell's smile was sharp. Because I checked with the cattle markets. After that blizzard, prices have dropped 40%. You can't sell your way out of this debt. Catherine stepped forward. Sure that you are. Montana territorial law allows for extension of debt repayment in cases of natural disaster. The blizzard qualifies as force majeure. Mr. Westbrook is entitled to a 90-day extension. Blackwell's eyes flicked to Catherine, something cold moving behind them. Mrs. Westbrook, how knowledgeable. Did your father teach you law before he died in disgrace? My father died innocent of the crimes you fabricated. Catherine's voice was ice. And yes, he taught me law, enough to know that you have no legal standing to collect this debt early. Then I'll wait until the 31st, but not a day longer. Blackwell turned back to Samuel. And when you can't pay, I'll take everything, the land, the cattle, this house, all of it. You'll take nothing. We'll see. Blackwell remounted his horse but paused before leaving. One more thing. I've filed a petition with the territorial court challenging your adoption of the Morrison girl, on the grounds that your marriage is one of convenience, not legitimacy, and therefore does not constitute a stable family environment. Samuel's blood went cold. You have no standing. I have affidavits from 3 witnesses who swear your marriage is a sham, that Mrs. Westbrook sleeps in Tom Morgan's old cabin separate from the main house, that there is no genuine marital relationship. Blackwell's smile was poisonous. If the court agrees, little Sophie goes to Denver, and you lose everything. He rode away, leaving Samuel and Catherine standing in the snow with the weight of catastrophe pressing down on them. He's bluffing, Catherine said, but her voice shook. Is he? Samuel turned to her. We do sleep separately. We are married in name only. Every word he said is true. But we're raising Sophie together. We're building a home. On paper, we're strangers living under the same roof. Blackwell will use that against us. Catherine's face went pale. What do we do? Samuel looked at the house where Sophie was inside doing her lessons, unaware that her entire world was about to be ripped apart again. Looked at Catherine, who had come to Montana in rags and had given them order and warmth and something that felt dangerously like love. We prove him wrong, Samuel said. We show the court that this is a real marriage, a real family. How? By making it real. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. You mean actually consummate the marriage? I mean we start living as husband and wife, not just in name, in truth. Samuel's jaw tightened. I won't let Blackwell take Sophie from us because of legal technicalities. And after? When this is over? I don't know. But right now, I'm asking you to trust me. To trust that whatever this is between us, it's worth fighting for. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll move my belongings from Tom's cabin into the main house. Into your room. Are you sure? No. Her smile was trembling, but I'm doing it anyway. That night, Catherine brought her few belongings into Samuel's room. 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a book of poetry her father had given her, a wooden box containing letters and memories. She stood in the doorway looking lost, and Samuel realized she was as terrified as he was. I've never, she began, then stopped. Neither have I, not like this, not with someone who matters. Margaret had been all performance and calculation. This was different. This was Catherine in a worn nightgown with her hair down, looking at him like he was both sanctuary and threat. We don't have to do anything tonight, Samuel said quietly. Just sleep in the same room. Let the household staff see. Build the evidence of a real marriage. Relief flooded Catherine's face. Thank you. But when they lay in the dark on opposite sides of the large bed, neither of them could sleep. Samuel was acutely aware of every breath she took, every small movement. Samuel? Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes? I'm glad I came to Montana, even with everything that's happened. I'm glad. So am I. Silence, then Catherine's hand found his in the darkness between them. They fell asleep that way, holding hands like children afraid of the dark. And in the morning, when Sophie came running in to wake them, she found them tangled together, Catherine's head on Samuel's shoulder, his arm around her waist. You're sleeping together. Sophie's delight was pure and uncomplicated. Catherine blushed. Samuel smiled despite himself. That's what married people do, he said. And for that moment, it felt true. The night that changed everything came 3 days later. Catherine had been sleeping in Samuel's room for a week now. They had maintained their careful distance, staying on opposite sides of the large bed, holding hands in the darkness but going no further. Both of them afraid to cross the final line that would make this marriage real in every sense. But on the 8th night, something shifted. Sophie had gone to bed early, exhausted from her lessons. The house was quiet, snow falling soft outside the windows. Samuel and Catherine sat by the fire in their bedroom, not speaking, just existing in the same space. Catherine broke the silence first. Samuel, we cannot live this way forever. Pretending, holding back. He looked at her, firelight catching in her dark hair. I know. Either this is real or it is not. Either we are married or we are not. Samuel stood and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I want it to be real. I have wanted that for weeks now. But I am afraid. So am I, Catherine cupped his face. But I am more afraid of waking up one day and realizing we wasted this chance. She leaned forward and kissed him. Not the chaste kiss of their wedding day, not the gentle kiss of companionship, but a kiss that carried months of longing and loneliness and desperate hope. Samuel responded without thought, pulling her close, finally allowing himself to feel everything he had been holding back. That night, the contract became a covenant. The arrangement became a marriage, and the careful walls they had built between them came tumbling down. Neither of them spoke of it in the morning, but everything had changed. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange blend of domesticity and desperation. By day, Samuel worked frantically to scrape together enough money to pay Blackwell's debt. He sold equipment. He borrowed against future cattle sales. He called in every favor owed to him across the territory. By night, he came home to Catherine and Sophie, to dinner at the table together, to Sophie's lessons and Catherine's quiet competence, to sleeping beside a woman who was becoming more than a wife in name only. They had not yet crossed the final line, had not actually consummated the marriage. But there were other intimacies. The way Catherine braided her hair before bed, the way Samuel read to Sophie while Catherine mended clothes, the way they moved around each other in the bedroom with growing ease. Crawford watched all of this with something like satisfaction. You're falling in love with her, he said one afternoon. I'm fulfilling a contract. Samuel, I've known you for 10 years. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at Catherine. Samuel did not deny it, could not deny it. It doesn't matter. Even if I clear the debt, Blackwell is still trying to take Sophie, and he'll do anything to win. Then we fight him in court, prove your marriage is legitimate. With what evidence? We've been married 8 weeks. That's barely enough time to establish a relationship. Then make the time count. But time ran out faster than Samuel anticipated. On March 28th, 3 days before the debt deadline, Catherine vanished. Samuel came home at sunset to find Sophie hysterical and the house in chaos. Mama went to town to buy fabric and she didn't come back. She was supposed to be back hours ago. Cold dread settled in Samuel's gut. He rode into Pine Creek at a gallop, checking the general store, the seamstress, every place Catherine might have gone. No one had seen her since noon. Then he found her horse tied outside Blackwell's office building. The animal was trembling, still saddled, clearly abandoned in haste. Samuel burst through Blackwell's door with his pistol drawn. The office was empty, but on the desk sat a note in Blackwell's precise handwriting. Mr. Westbrook, your wife has been detained for trespassing and attempted theft. She will be released upon your agreement to the following terms. Immediate transfer of all property rights to Montana Frontier Bank to be held in trust pending payment of your debt. Failure to agree will result in criminal charges against Mrs. Westbrook and forfeiture of your adoption of the Morrison child. You have 24 hours. Richard Blackwell. Samuel's vision went red. Sheriff Buck appeared in the doorway. Samuel, put the gun down. Where is she? In the holding cell. Blackwell caught her breaking into his office safe. That's a lie. He has witnesses. His clerk saw her climb through the back window. Buck looked miserable. I'm sorry, Samuel, but the law is the law. Samuel shoved past him and went to the small jail at the back of the building. Catherine sat on a narrow cot, her dress torn, her face bruised. What happened? I tried to find evidence. Catherine's voice was hoarse. Proof that Blackwell forged documents against my father. I thought if I could get into his safe, I could find the truth. Alone, without telling anyone. I didn't want to risk you or Sophie. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I could do it myself. Samuel gripped the bars hard enough to hurt. You could have been killed. I know, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help. By throwing yourself at Blackwell, by giving him exactly what he wants. Catherine stood, came to the bars. What does he want? Everything. He wants me to sign over the ranch, to give him legal control in exchange for dropping charges against you. Don't do it. Let me rot in here. Keep the ranch. Keep Sophie. Keep everything you've built. Catherine, he'll send you to prison. I don't care. Samuel, you can't give up everything for me. I'm not worth it. Samuel reached through the bars and cupped her bruised face. You're worth everything. The words hung between them, raw and true. I love you, Catherine whispered. I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I love you. I love you too. Samuel pressed his forehead against the bars. Which is why I'm getting you out of here. How? Samuel smiled grimly. By doing something your father would have done. The right thing, no matter the cost. Samuel gathered his forces in Crawford's office that night. Present were Crawford himself, Sheriff Buck, a federal judge from Helena who owed Samuel a favor, and 15 of Samuel's most loyal ranch hands. Gentlemen, Samuel said, we're going to war. Crawford raised an eyebrow. Against Richard Blackwell? He has 100 men. Then we'll fight smarter, not harder. Samuel spread a map across the desk. Catherine found something before Blackwell caught her. She sent a note with one of the guards. He pulled out a scrap of paper covered in Catherine's handwriting, a list of names and dates. 12 men who had refused to sell land to Blackwell and had died in convenient accidents over the past 5 years. This is murder, the federal judge said quietly. If we can prove it. We can. Catherine saw documents in Blackwell's safe connecting him to each death. She didn't have time to take them, but she knows what to look for. So we break her out and she testifies. No, Samuel's voice was hard. We use her as bait. Blackwell thinks he has leverage. Let him believe it. While he's focused on Catherine, we hit his real weakness. Which is? His partner, Judge Harrison of the Territorial Court. The man Blackwell has been bribing for years to get favorable rulings. Samuel smiled without humor. I have proof. Letters, payments, all documented and ready to hand over to federal authorities. Crawford's eyes widened. How did you get that? Tom Morgan. Before he died, he was investigating Harrison for corruption on behalf of another rancher. He kept meticulous records. Samuel pulled a thick folder from his coat. I found them hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his cabin 2 weeks ago when I was clearing out his things after Catherine moved to the main house. Tom never told me about the investigation. He must have wanted ironclad proof before bringing it forward. He died before he could finish gathering evidence. But what he had is damning enough. So we finish it for him. Exactly. Samuel looked at each man in turn. Tomorrow, Blackwell will expect me to cave, to sign over my ranch and beg for Catherine's freedom. Instead, I'm going to arrest Judge Harrison on federal corruption charges. And when Blackwell tries to intervene, we arrest him too. Buck shook his head slowly. Samuel, if this goes wrong, you lose everything. Catherine goes to prison. Sophie goes to Denver. And Blackwell takes your empire anyway. I know, but I'm done playing defense. It's time to attack. The plan was set in motion at dawn. Federal marshals arrested Judge Harrison in his home, dragging him out in his nightclothes while his wife screamed. By noon, half the town knew that the territorial judge had been taking bribes for the better part of a decade. Blackwell received word in his office and immediately rode for the jail where Catherine was being held. Samuel was waiting for him. "Let her go, Richard." Blackwell laughed. "Are you insane? I have you exactly where I want you." "Do you? Because I just destroyed your pet judge. And I have evidence linking you to 12 murders. Federal evidence that's already been delivered to authorities in Washington." Blackwell's smile slipped. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Samuel pulled out copies of the documents Catherine had seen. "Your mistake was keeping records. Tom Morgan found them, and now they're going to hang you." For the first time, Samuel saw real fear in Blackwell's eyes. "You can't prove anything." "I can prove enough to start an investigation. And once they start digging, Richard, they'll find everything. Every bribe, every murder, every piece of land you stole." Samuel stepped closer. "So here's my offer. You drop all charges against Catherine. You forgive my debt. You leave Montana and never come back. And I won't testify against you. And if I refuse, then I destroy you. I take you down so hard they'll be talking about it for 100 years. The great Richard Blackwell, hanged for murder." Blackwell's jaw worked. "I could kill you right now." "You could, but I'm not alone." Samuel gestured to the windows where 15 armed ranch hands stood watching. "You'd die before you got off a shot." The two men stared at each other. A lifetime of enmity crystallized in that moment. Finally, Blackwell spoke. "You win this round, Westbrook, but this isn't over." "Yes, it is. Because if you ever come near my family again, I won't offer you exile. I'll offer you a grave." Blackwell stormed out. Within an hour, Catherine was released. By nightfall, Blackwell had left Montana on the eastbound train, leaving his empire to collapse behind him. Samuel found Catherine on the porch of their home, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset. "It's over," he said quietly. "Is it?" She looked up at him. "Blackwell is gone. The debt is forgiven. But what about us?" Samuel sat beside us. "What about us? You married me for convenience, to protect Sophie and save your ranch. You didn't sign up for love." "Neither did you." "No, but here we are anyway." Catherine's smile was trembling. "So what do we do now, Samuel Westbrook?" Samuel took her hand. "We build a life, a real one, with Sophie and whatever other children God gives us. We build a legacy that isn't about land or cattle or proving anything to anyone." "What kind of legacy?" "The kind where a man learns to be a father, where a woman in rags becomes a queen, where an orphan finds a home." He pulled Catherine closer. "The kind of legacy that matters." Catherine kissed him then, properly, deeply, for the first time, and when they broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered against his lips, "I'm pregnant." Samuel froze. "What?" 2 months. I wasn't sure until last week. I was going to tell you, but then Blackwell happened, and everything fell apart, and I thought I might lose everything, including you." "A baby." Samuel's hand moved to her stomach, still flat beneath her dress. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Samuel pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. And I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life." Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Are you two kissing again? That's gross." They laughed, and Catherine pulled the girl into the embrace. The three of them, soon to be 4, wrapped together against the Montana cold. A family, imperfect and complicated and absolutely real. Inside the house, the fire burned warm. Outside, spring was coming to the frozen land. And for the first time in 18 years, Samuel Westbrook felt like he had finally come home. But their story was far from over. Spring of 1885 came to Montana like a promise kept. The snow melted from the valleys first, revealing grass that had survived the brutal winter beneath its frozen blanket. Then the hills turned green, and finally the high country began to thaw. With the spring came new life, calves born to the surviving cattle, birds returning from their southern migration. And in the Westbrook house, the sound of a woman's laughter that had been absent for too long. Catherine's pregnancy progressed through those warm months with a combination of joy and terror that Samuel had not anticipated. He found himself worrying about things he had never considered before, whether she was eating enough, whether she was working too hard teaching Sophie, whether the baby would be healthy. "You're hovering," Catherine told him one May morning as he adjusted her chair for the third time during breakfast. "I'm being attentive. You're being ridiculous." But she was smiling. Sophie looked up from her French grammar. "Papa's scared." "I am not scared." "You are too. You check on Mama 6 times every night." I counted. Samuel looked at his daughter, who at 9 years old was already too observant for his comfort. "I just want to make sure she's comfortable." "She's growing a human being inside her body, Papa. She's not comfortable. That's not how it works." Sophie spoke with the absolute certainty of a child who had been reading every medical text Catherine could find on pregnancy and childbirth. Catherine laughed so hard she had to set down her teacup. "Out of the mouths of babes. I'm not a babe, I'm 9 3/4. My apologies, wise old Sophie." Samuel watched them together and felt that now familiar tightness in his chest, love. It still surprised him, even after all these months, the way it snuck up on him during ordinary moments, the way it made everything both more precious and more terrifying. The ranch itself was recovering from the winter's devastation, though slowly. Samuel had lost 5,000 head of cattle, but the remaining 20,000 were thriving on spring grass. The market had stabilized after the panic of the blizzard, and Samuel was able to sell enough beef to rebuild his depleted cash reserves. But the real change was in how he ran the empire. Samuel had begun transforming the ranch from a single massive holding into something more sustainable and community-focused. Crawford found him in the barn one afternoon in June, reviewing the books with Catherine. The lawyer stopped in the doorway, staring. "Am I hallucinating, or is Samuel Westbrook actually delegating?" "Catherine has a better head for numbers than I do." Samuel gestured to the ledgers spread across the workbench. "She's been managing the accounts for 3 months now." "And saving you 20% on operating costs," Catherine added without looking up. Crawford settled onto a hay bale. "Samuel, I've been your lawyer for 10 years. In that time, I've watched you refuse to trust anyone with anything more important than mucking stalls. And now you're letting your wife manage your entire financial operation? She's better at it than I am." "That's not the point. The point is you're trusting her." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "A wise woman once told me that legacy isn't about land or cattle. It's about people. I'm trying to build something that will last beyond me. And that means learning to share the burden, to let other people be part of the work." He looked at Catherine, who had paused in her calculations to listen. "I can't build a legacy alone. I need partners. I need family." Crawford smiled. "Tom would be proud of you." The mention of Tom Morgan still brought a pang of grief, but it was softened now by the knowledge that Tom's daughter was thriving, that his sacrifice had not been in vain. "I hope so," Samuel said quietly. That evening, Samuel made an announcement at dinner that shocked even Catherine. "I'm dividing the ranch." Sophie dropped her fork. Catherine's hand froze halfway to her water glass. "What do you mean, dividing it?" Catherine asked carefully. "I own 60,000 acres. That's too much for one man to manage alone, and too much to pass on to one heir without creating resentment." Samuel pulled out a map he had been working on for weeks. "I'm giving every ranch hand who has worked for me for more than 5 years 100 acres of land, free and clear." Catherine studied the map. "That's 50 men, 5,000 acres. "Yes. You're just giving it away?" "I'm investing in people. These men have been loyal to me for years, some of them for decades. They have earned the right to own something themselves." Crawford, who had stayed for dinner, leaned forward. "Samuel, this is radical. Other ranchers are going to call you insane." "Let them. I'm not interested in what other ranchers think." Samuel traced the property lines on the map. "Each man gets his 100 acres and the rights to graze cattle on the common land. In exchange, they form a cooperative. We share resources, share risk, share profit." "You're creating a community." "I'm creating a legacy. If I die tomorrow, this ranch doesn't get sold off to the highest bidder. It belongs to 50 families who have a stake in its success." Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Your father would have loved this. Samuel's father had been a coal miner who died in a cave-in when Samuel was 12. A man who had owned nothing and left nothing except a son determined to be different. My father taught me that the only wealth that matters is what you can build with your own hands, Samuel said quietly. But I'm learning that real wealth is what you build with other people's hands working alongside yours. The announcement was made the following Sunday at a gathering of all the ranch hands and their families. 50 men, most of them weathered and worn from years of hard labor, stood in the yard while Samuel explained the plan. There was silence when he finished, long, heavy silence. Then an old cowboy named Jack Sullivan, who had worked for Samuel since the very beginning, stepped forward with tears streaming down his face. Boss, you're giving us land? Real land to own. To own, Jack, 100 acres each. You build a house, raise cattle, pass it on to your children. Jack fell to his knees right there in the dirt. God bless you, Mr. Westbrook. God bless you. One by one, the other men came forward. Some shook Samuel's hand, some embraced him. Some wept openly with the relief of men who had never expected to own anything in their lives. Catherine watched from the porch with Sophie, both of them crying. Papa's a good man, Sophie said. Yes, he is. Are you still glad you came to Montana? Catherine looked at her daughter, at the ranch spreading out in all directions, at Samuel surrounded by grateful men whose lives he had just changed forever. I would do it all again, she said. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of uncertainty, because it led me here. 5 years passed. In the summer of 1890, Samuel Westbrook stood on the same ridge where he had stood 6 years earlier, watching storm clouds gather. But everything else had changed. Over the 5 years since defeating Blackwell, Samuel had quietly purchased adjacent ranches from struggling neighbors, expanding the cooperative's total holdings from 60,000 to 200,000 acres. Through careful acquisitions and homestead partnerships, the land now supported 100 families instead of just 50. Below him, the Westbrook Cattle Cooperative now included 100 families farming 200,000 acres across 3 counties. What had started as 50 men with 100 acres each had grown into the largest and most successful ranching operation in Montana Territory. The newspapers had started calling Samuel the last cattle baron, not because he owned the most land, but because he had revolutionized how cattle ranching worked in the West. His cooperative model had been copied across 5 states. His methods for winter feeding and spring breeding had become industry standard. But Samuel cared less about his reputation than about the fact that his family was thriving. Catherine stood beside him now, her hand resting on the shoulder of their son, Samuel Jr., who was 4 years old and already showing his father's stubborn determination. Their daughter Grace, 2 years old, was asleep in Catherine's arms. Sophie, now 14, sat on her horse nearby, reading a letter that had arrived that morning from Boston Ladies Seminary. She had been accepted with a full scholarship, one of only 20 girls in the entire country to receive the honor. Papa, Sophie called out, it says I can start in September. Samuel's heart clenched. That's only 3 months away. I know, is it all right if I go? Every instinct in Samuel's body screamed to keep his daughter close, to protect her, to never let her out of his sight. But he looked at Catherine, who nodded slightly, and he remembered what he had learned about legacy. Of course you can go, he said, his voice only slightly rough. Your mama would be proud. Both your mamas. Sophie rode over and leaned down to hug him. Thank you, Papa, for everything. You'll come back, though, after you finish? I'll come back. This is home. Home, the word still had the power to move Samuel after all these years. That evening, a messenger arrived from Helena. The territorial governor wanted to meet with Samuel about a proposal to bring the Transcontinental Railroad through Montana, with a major hub on Westbrook land. The offer was generous, $1.5 million for 15,000 acres. Samuel called a meeting of the cooperative's governing board, which now included Catherine, Crawford, Sheriff Buck, and representatives from each of the member families. The railroad wants our land, Samuel explained, spreading maps across the table. If we sell, we get rich. If we don't sell, Montana loses the railroad to Wyoming. How much land? Asked Jack Sullivan, who now owned 500 acres and served as the cooperative's treasurer. 15,000 acres, about 50 families would have to relocate. The room erupted in argument. Some wanted to take the money and run. Others refused to leave land they had spent 5 years improving. Catherine raised her hand for silence. As the cooperative's chief financial officer, she commanded respect. "We vote," she said simply. "Every family affected gets a say. Majority rules." The vote took place over 3 days. In the end, it was close. 26 families voted to sell, 24 voted to stay. Samuel made the decision that would cement his legend. "We sell 10,000 acres," he announced, "the land without homes on it. We keep 5,000 acres for the families who want to stay. The railroad gets enough room for their hub. We get $1 million instead of 1.5. You're leaving 500,000 on the table," the railroad representative protested. "I'm keeping 24 families in their homes. That's worth more than money." The story made newspapers across the country. "The last cattle baron chooses people over profit," the headlines read. Samuel became a symbol of a new kind of Western success. Not the lone wolf conquering the frontier, but the community builder sharing the wealth. But Samuel cared less about fame than about the fact that on his 44th birthday, he had dinner with his wife, his children, and 50 families who called him friend. The years continued to pass, each one adding layers to the legacy Samuel and Catherine were building together. Sophie graduated from Boston Ladies Seminary in 1894 with highest honors, then shocked everyone by announcing her intention to attend medical school. She became Dr. Sophie Westbrook in 1898, the first female physician in Montana Territory, and immediately opened a hospital in Pine Creek that served the entire region. Samuel Jr. grew into a young man who combined his father's business acumen with his mother's compassion. At 18, he was already managing significant portions of the cooperative and implementing innovations that increased efficiency by 30%. Grace, named after Catherine's beloved grandmother who had taught her to read and write, showed early promise as an educator. She followed in Catherine's footsteps, opening schools across the territory for children whose families could not afford private education. But in 1895, something unexpected happened that tested everything Samuel had built. Victoria Pemberton came to call. Samuel had not seen Richard Blackwell's former ally in over 10 years. She was 50 now, her beauty faded, but her pride still intact. She arrived at the ranch in a carriage that had seen better days, wearing a dress that was elegant but outdated. Catherine received her in the parlor with perfect courtesy. "Mrs. Pemberton, what brings you here after all these years?" Victoria's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. "I came to apologize." The room went silent. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. "Apologize?" Catherine's voice was carefully neutral. "For the way I treated you. When you first arrived in Montana, I called you a fortune hunter, said terrible things." Victoria's voice cracked. "I was wrong." "What changed your mind?" "Everything." Victoria looked around the comfortable parlor at the evidence of family life everywhere. Children's books, Sophie's medical text, Samuel Jr.'s school papers. "My husband left me wealthy but alone. My children visit twice a year and only to discuss their inheritance. I have everything money can buy and nothing that matters." She looked directly at Catherine. "You came here in rags and built a kingdom, not of land or cattle, but of love, of family, of community. I've spent 15 years watching you and Samuel create something I never had with all my money and social standing." Catherine's expression softened. "Mrs. Pemberton, please call me Victoria, and please, if you can find it in your heart, forgive a bitter old woman who didn't know the difference between wealth and richness." Samuel, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Victoria, would you like to stay for dinner?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I would be honored." That night they sat together around the table. Samuel and Catherine. Sophie, home from medical school for a visit. Samuel Jr. and Grace. And Victoria Pemberton, who laughed for the first time in years as she watched this family that had once been nothing more than a business arrangement. After dinner, Victoria pulled Catherine aside. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you turn a marriage of convenience into this?" Catherine thought about the question. about arriving in torn rags on Christmas Eve, about Sophie's prayers and Samuel's wounded heart, and the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. "We chose each other," she said finally. "Not once, but every day. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." "I chose wrong," Victoria said quietly. "I chose Richard Pemberton's money over real connection, and I've paid for it every day since. It's not too late to choose differently now." Victoria smiled through her tears. Maybe not. She left that evening with an invitation to return whenever she wished, and over the next 5 years she became a regular visitor, eventually moving to a small house in Pine Creek and spending her final years as an honorary grandmother to Samuel and Catherine's grandchildren. Redemption, Samuel learned, was possible for everyone. Winter of 1900. Samuel Westbrook sat in his study on Christmas Eve, 15 years to the day since Catherine had stepped off that train in torn rags. He was 49 years old now, his hair more silver than black, his face lined with weather and time, but his eyes were warm when he looked at the photograph on his desk. Catherine at 43, still beautiful, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Sophie had married Daniel Chen, a Chinese immigrant doctor, breaking racial barriers and creating scandal that Samuel had defended fiercely. They had given Samuel 3 grandchildren who were already showing signs of inheriting their mother's brilliant mind. Samuel Jr., at 19, had just proposed to Mary Sullivan, Jack Sullivan's daughter, keeping the legacy of the cooperative in the family. Grace, at 17, was teaching at Westbrook Academy, the school Catherine had founded 10 years earlier. The ranch had grown to 500 families farming 500,000 acres. The cooperative was worth tens of millions of dollars, but Samuel owned only 10% of it. The rest belonged to the families who worked the land. He had become exactly what the newspapers called him, the last cattle baron. Not because he owned the most, but because he had transformed what ownership meant. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Catherine entered, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. She handed him one and settled into the chair beside his desk. 15 years, she said. 15 years since I nearly sent you away because I was too scared to trust. 15 years since I arrived with nothing but a carpetbag and my integrity. Samuel raised his glass. "To the best business arrangement I ever made." Catherine laughed. "Is that what we're calling it?" "What would you call it?" "A miracle." She clinked her glass against his. "A Christmas miracle." They drank in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of companionship. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked. "Coming to Montana, marrying me?" "Not once." Catherine set down her glass and took his hand. "You gave me more than security, Samuel. You gave me purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me a legacy that will outlast both of us. The legacy is yours as much as mine." "No, it's ours, and Sophie's, and Samuel Jr.'s, and Grace's, and everyone who has built this with us." Catherine squeezed his hand. "That's what you never understood when you were alone. Sekam. Legacy isn't what one person builds. It's what a community creates together." Samuel pulled her close, and she came willingly, settling into his lap the way she had done 1,000 times over 15 years. "I love you," he said. "I know. You tell me every day." "Not often enough." Catherine kissed him. "Every day for 15 years is pretty often, Samuel Westbrook." A commotion in the hallway. Sophie's voice calling out, Samuel Jr.'s laughter, Grace singing a Christmas carol off-key, the sounds of family. "They're here for Christmas dinner," Catherine said, standing reluctantly. "All 23 of them." 23. Sophie brought the children. Samuel Jr. brought Mary and her parents. Grace invited half her students because they had nowhere else to go. Catherine smiled. "It's going to be chaos." "I love chaos." "Since when?" "Since it became this kind of case, the kind that means home." They walked out together to greet their family. And as Samuel looked at the faces gathered in his home, at the children and grandchildren and honorary family members who had come to celebrate Christmas, he felt something he had not felt in the dark years before Catherine. Peace. Not the peace of having conquered, not the peace of having won, but the peace of having built something that mattered, of having loved and been loved in return, of having learned that the greatest empire a man could build was not measured in acres or cattle or dollars, but in lives touched and hearts changed and families created. Epilogue. The recording, Denver, Colorado. Spring 1945. Samuel Westbrook finished his story as the recording machine clicked off. 95 years old, his hands trembling, his voice thin but steady. The young lawyer sat in silence, visibly moved. "That's quite a story, Mr. Westbrook. It's the only story that matters." Samuel looked down at the photograph again, Catherine and Sophie. "Everything else is just details. Why are you recording this now?" "Because I'm dying. Doctor gives me 6 months." Samuel said it matter-of-factly. "And because I want my great-great-grandchildren to know that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give away." The cooperative still exists? Stronger than ever. 5,000 families now, 500,000 acres, worth more than I can calculate. But none of it belongs to me anymore. Samuel smiled. "It belongs to everyone." "What happened to Richard Blackwell?" "He fled Montana in March of 1885 after we exposed his crimes. Last anyone heard reliably, he died in Mexico City in 1887. Broke, alone, and forgotten. His empire collapsed within 6 months of his departure. Everything he built turned to dust." Samuel shrugged. "I stopped caring 30 years ago. He didn't matter. He was just an obstacle. The story was never about him." "What was it about?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "It was about a man who thought he could build an empire alone and learned he was wrong. About a woman who came in rags and became a queen. About a little girl who prayed for someone kind and got a family instead. And about how sometimes God answers prayers in ways we never expect." He stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "I have one request." "Anything, Mr. Westbrook. When you transcribe this, make sure they know that Catherine was the hero, not me. I was just a stubborn fool who got lucky enough to find her. She built the empire. She created the legacy. I just provided the land. I'll make sure they know." Samuel nodded and shuffled toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. The cooperative has established a foundation, the Catherine Morrison Westbrook Foundation for Women's Education. It provides full scholarships to any woman, regardless of background or circumstance, who wants to pursue higher education." "That's wonderful." Catherine would have loved it. She believed that education was the only wealth that couldn't be stolen. Samuel's eyes were distant, seeing across the decades. She was right about that. She was right about most things. The lawyer walked Samuel to his car, where Sophie was waiting. She was 69 now, semi-retired from active practice, but still consulting at the hospital she had founded, still fierce and brilliant. "Did you finish?" she asked her father. "I finished." "Good. Now let's get you home. Catherine is waiting." Samuel smiled. "Catherine died 2 years ago." "I know, Papa, but she's still waiting. She always waited for you." They drove through Denver toward the mountains, toward Montana, toward home. And Samuel Westbrook, the last cattle baron, felt the weight of 95 years settle over him like a familiar blanket. He had 6 months left, maybe less, but he had built something that would last forever. Not land, not cattle, not money, family, community, legacy, the things that actually mattered. Final scene. Christmas Eve, 1945. Samuel Westbrook lay in his bed at the ranch house in Montana, surrounded by his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 60 people in total, 3 generations, all gathered to celebrate Christmas and to say goodbye. Snow fell outside, thick and soft, just like it had 60 years ago when Catherine arrived. Sophie held his hand. "Papa, can you hear us?" "I can hear." His voice was barely a whisper. "We love you." "I know, I love you too. All of you." Samuel's eyes found each face in the room. "Promise me something. Anything. Keep the cooperative together. Keep the legacy alive, not for me, for everyone who comes after." "We promise." Samuel closed his eyes. And in his mind, he was 34 again, standing on a frozen platform on Christmas Eve, watching a woman in a torn dress step off a train with nothing but dignity and hope. "Catherine," he whispered. "I'm here, my love." Sophie's voice was gentle. playing along with his confusion. I kept my promise. I came back. You always did. Was I a good husband? A good father? Sophie's tears fell on his hand. The best, the very best. Samuel smiled. Then I can rest. He took his final breath, surrounded by love, surrounded by family, surrounded by the legacy he and Catherine had built together. And if anyone had been watching closely, they would have sworn they saw two figures in the falling snow outside, a man and a woman, young again, walking hand in hand toward the mountains, going home together, the way they always had. The end. The Westbrook Cattle Cooperative still exists today, 8 decades after Samuel's death. It is one of the largest and most successful agricultural cooperatives in the United States, supporting over 10,000 families across 6 states. The Catherine Morrison Westbrook Foundation has provided full scholarships to over 100,000 women in the past 80 years, many of them first-generation college students from impoverished backgrounds. Sophie Westbrook's hospital became the Westbrook Medical Center, now a Level 1 trauma center serving all of Montana. And in Pine Creek, Montana, there stands a statue of a man and a woman, hand in hand, with a little girl between them. The plaque reads, Samuel and Catherine Westbrook, the last cattle baron and the woman who taught him what legacy truly means. 1884-1945. They built an empire of love. Every Christmas Eve, someone places fresh roses at the base of that statue. Red roses for Samuel, white roses for Catherine, and a small wooden horse for Sophie, because some legacies never die. They just keep growing, generation after generation, proving that what you build with love lasts forever.